All right, for real this time, Genesis 30. Last time, we saw Jacob in Padan Aram getting his wives, and the mess that was made from the deceitfulness and favoritism in a family structure. And boy, we've seen that go upside down a couple times in just this family that we've been going with here. Let's remind ourselves of what has happened so far, Jacob and his wives and his children so far. So we have Leah and Jacob had Reuben, which means, look, a son. I mean, pretty interesting name there, original. Simeon, which means hearing. She was talking about how the Lord had heard her. Levi, which means joined. After the third son, she thought for sure that Jacob would be joined to her. And Judah, it means praise. So you have those 4 sons so far that we've seen born to Jacob and Leah. And we know, because of the balance of the Bible, that it is through Judah that the Jesus can go back to his descendants all the way back to Judah. So it is through that line there. Interesting that God gave Leah that privilege. Now, what we're going to see tonight is that Rachel is taking note. Rachel is keeping score. And she finds out that she's out to a big and early deficit. And so now she makes a move to have sons for Jacob as well. As you can imagine, she's jealous, and it makes sense. So let's read the first 8 verses here to get context. Genesis chapter 30, beginning in verse 1. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife. And Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived, and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. All right, so that's where we are going to just stop for a second to get our bearings here with these two. So Leah and Jacob, 4 sons. Leah's like, I've got one up on Rachel now. He's got to love me more. She's not giving him any children. We can tell by the way she named her children that she believes God is favoring her. And now Rachel takes note. She's like, I can't let this happen. And notice, she sees that she hasn't given any sons to Jacob, and she gets angry and kind of has this emotional outburst in verse 1. She says, Give me children or I'm going to die. Well, and that jealousy now comes in the form of an outburst, and she goes on to demand children from Jacob. And Jacob, I don't know, he probably wanted to take a long walk after that one, you know. What can he do about it? You know, he's obviously, it's just not working out, and she just gets on him and yells at him and has this outburst, and he probably just wanted to, I need a minute, you know. He wanted to take a break, but he gives it right back to her. Verse 2, Jacob gets mad and matches her emotion, and he says something very true, but also very harsh toward her. His anger was kindled. It was stirred up. It was fiery against his wife. And he said, Am I in God's stead? Am I God? Can I open up your womb and give you children? Now, that's a harsh thing to say. And granted, she was, angry with him and had an emotional outburst. But we learned this morning in Colossians chapter 3, verse 19, that husbands are not to be harsh with their wives. And it's funny to me that it just happens to be on this day that we read Jacob being harsh with Rachel. He's telling the truth, but there's a better way to say that, I think. But he says, am I God? Can I make you no longer barren? So in other words, he says, it's really not my fault at all. God is the one who's determined that you're not going to have children. I can't do anything about this. Evidently, she knew it was her that was causing the barrenness and not Jacob. Obviously, he's having children already. And so she sees that something's wrong with her, so she says, I have a solution. Now, here we go again with people with their solutions, right? How many times have we seen somebody in just this family come up with a bright idea? And here she goes, I've got a bright idea. Why don't you take my maid, Bilhah, and have children with her? And when she delivers those children, they can be delivered on my lap and become my very own. Now, a rational thinking person understands that just because they deliver from the womb and set it on somebody else's lap does not make them their child, but she has to do something to even the score. And I wonder how many times as followers of the Lord and God's people that when we feel like we're missing out on blessings, we have to find a way to even the score. And it's just sad here how this continues in this family, but it's probably good for us to note not to get ahead of God, not to engineer or try to orchestrate ways that we can fix these things in our own lives, and to let God take control of this. God has the ability to do all that we ask or think. In fact, Ephesians 3:20 says he can do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. And when we begin to come up with solutions, and in fact engineer ways to make it happen, most of the time we wind up hurting not just ourselves, but others around us. This is a whole weird situation because she makes this suggestion, and the next thing we know, she gives Bilhah, her maid, to Jacob to act as a wife. In other words, she is going to carry out the procreating function of a wife. She doesn't really become his wife in matrimony. So you can take her and use her as a wife to carry out those duties of procreation. He goes right along with it. And verse 5 says that she becomes pregnant and she bears a son. And verse 6 says, God has judged me and has also heard my voice. And by judged, she doesn't mean looked negatively on me. She believes that God has looked positively on her and said, okay, I'm going to give you a son through this woman. So she says, he judged me. He saw that it was fair and right to give me a son through Bilhah. Because obviously she continues by saying he's heard my voice and he's given me a son. She credits God with this. And she called his name Dan. And of course the name Dan means judge. Or he judged, or he vindicated. She feels completely vindicated in her decision to give her maid to Jacob. Pretty wild. So she saw it as a sign of God's approval. And then verse 7 says they go right back to the same situation. Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bears a second son. And Rachel said, this is great. Now here comes the competitive nature, the sisterly competition. With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have won. I beat my sister. Now if we're keeping score, no, she hasn't. It's still 4-2. But what she's saying here is Leah, if you look up at the verse 35 of the previous chapter, Leah left bearing. So she was finished, and it looked like she was going to be done for a while. And so Rachel says, okay, I'm catching up. I'm now providing sons for my husband. Even though it's not through me, I'm giving him more sons. And she says, with great wrestlings, I have beaten my sister. And she names him Naphtali, which means twist or struggle. To twist or to struggle. So she sees this as a way that she has struggled and wrestled with her sister and won. That's not the last time we're going to see wrestling, is it? In just 2 chapters, chapter 32, we're going to see God and Jacob wrestle. And the idea there is that, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but Jacob will not let go of God until he blesses him. And then, as we've mentioned, God asks him a very interesting question. But that's Jacob and God. Right now, Rachel's winning her wrestling match, she thinks. Well, you know what's going to happen now, right? It's 4-2. Think of it like a ball game, right? You're cruising. You got 4 runs. The other team, it's 4-0. All of a sudden, they get 2 runs. All right, now the pressure's back on. We better score a little bit more, right? We got to build some insurance runs here. So, verse 9. When Leah saw that she had left bearing, she said, "Oh no, I'm not having children right now. I have an idea. I'm going to take a page out of Rachel's book." And verse 9 says, she gave Zilpah, her maid, to Jacob for a wife, to act as the procreating function of a wife. She sees she's losing ground. She's like, "All right, Zilpah, you're up. Give me children." Is this not crazy? Okay. Now, I understand this was a long time ago, but people are people. No matter when, people are people. And this is honestly, and it's crude and it's not TV worth watching, but these are those shows in the afternoon where there's, the test to see who's the father and all. I mean, this is absolute insanity among God's people. It's wild to watch it. And here we go. Take my maid then. You're going to give me children. Verse 10, and Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, "A troop cometh." And she called his name Gad. A troop is coming. She makes a prediction here. This is the first of many. All right, Rachel, you think you're catching up? Watch this. Now I've got 5, and this is just getting started. A troop is coming. Now, can you imagine naming your children names to poke back, for the purpose of poking back at your sister who you're in this competition of having children with, the husband that you share? Right? This is crazy. And the word Gad means, it's an expression. What good fortune I have. What good fortune I have. Verse 12. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Now I'm happy. Everything's good. Happy am I. For the daughters will call me blessed." And she called his name Asher. So she says, now all the women who know about me, they're going to say, "Wow, that Leah, she's a blessed woman. She's got 6 sons with Jacob. What a blessed woman." And the word Asher means happy or blessed. Couldn't make Rachel very happy, could it? So, now this narrative in verse 14 is going to shift. It goes from this competition of childbirth between sisters and maids and all kinds of craziness. Now watch how this takes a shift, and now we zero in on Reuben, Leah's firstborn. He's old enough to be out working in the fields at this point. What's Reuben up to? Well, let's read. Verse 14. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest, and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes." And she said unto her, "Is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? And wouldst thou take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, Therefore, he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. You picking this up? You picking up what's going on here? So, Reuben's out in the field. He comes across mandrakes, and he brings them to Leah, his mother. And Rachel finds out that there's now mandrakes available. Well, what in the world is a mandrake? It's a good question. Mandrakes are known for their exotic smell. They're mentioned in the Song of Solomon, And we all understand that book, that song, is a love song between a man and a woman, and a very intense book about the love of a man and a woman. And so it talks about the smell of the mandrakes and how beautiful and wonderful and enticing that they are. Now, this is still around, and Arabs call mandrakes devil's apples. Greeks call them love apples. So you see where we're going with this. It is a supposed aphrodisiac. And some believed, obviously they did, that mandrakes could enhance fertility. Rachel's convinced, or at least she's like, hey, I'll try anything, right? I'll try mandrakes if it'll help me have children. So they come across these mandrakes that are known for their alluring smell. They're known for like a love potion almost, and some people even believe they help with fertility. So Rachel finds out that there's mandrakes around, and she goes to Leah and says, hey, give me some of those mandrakes. I want some of those. And don't you love Leah's response, verse 15? Oh, you think it's no big deal that you took my husband? Oh, okay, so you already stole my husband, and now you want my son's mandrakes. No. Right? No, you know however they do it. You know, it just, you're not getting my husband, and you're not getting my mandrakes. So Rachel says, let's make a deal. This is awful. Rachel says, I have an idea. Let's make a deal. Tonight, you give me those mandrakes, and tonight I'll make sure that Jacob is with you. She's using Jacob as a bargaining chip so that she could eventually get back with Jacob to have children with Jacob. But you can have him tonight if you just give me these fertility drugs. Unreal. And people say the Bible isn't interesting. You know, it's boring. You're reading the wrong parts, man, all right? You are reading the wrong part. You want some entertainment. It's right here, right? If you read this today, you'd be like, oh, that sounds about right. You know, I mean, this was going on back then. It ain't boring. So she's got this idea, let's make a deal. You can have him tonight if you give me those fertility drugs. And by the way, I'm doing the best I can to keep this as PG as I can, because this is really kind of rough. This is so rough. And so, verse 16, Jacob comes out of the field. You just get the picture, right? He's worked all day. He's tired. He's coming home. He wants to have supper and go to bed. Maybe watch MASH and go to bed, all right? He's just tired. Jacob's coming out of the field in the evening, and Leah goes out to meet him. She's all excited. I don't know. This is bad. I get pictures in my mind when I read Bible stories, and I see this dog-tired guy coming home, probably dirty a little bit, sweaty. He just wants to eat dinner and go to sleep. And she comes out wearing the perfume, right? Kind of dolled up a little bit, maybe a little extra makeup, you know. Kind of maybe skips up to him, or at least, you know, is excited to see him. Jacob, you know. I know, I'm telling you. That's how I think. It's so weird. So anyway, she goes out to meet him and says, you have to come with me tonight because I have hired you with Reuben's mandrakes. I purchased you. You have no choice in the matter. Go ask Rachel, see what she says. She'll even tell you that you have to spend the night with me. You're mine. Bought you. One night, me and you paid in full. What's Jacob do, right? What's Jacob always do? Read the end of verse 16. And he lay with her that night. Okay. You know, can you at least give me dinner first? Can you make me something to eat? I'm tired, you know. Whatever, if Rachel says so, okay. Oh my word, like this is so weird, right? It's creepy, it's weird, strange. There's nothing good going on here. And then to beat it all, look at verse 17. This is weird. And God hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived and bare Jacob the 5th son. Now I'm watching this and I'm thinking like, God cannot be pleased with any of this. This is just so weird. But what I do see in this, and what I think we all have to take a moment to recognize, is that God's way is best and blessed. And he is clearly blessing Leah because, like it or not, Leah was Jacob's first wife. And I know that it all happened in deceit, and I know that it was all kind of messed with, but God orchestrates things and he works things out. He sees this individual at first, Leah, who was used as a pawn between Laban and Jacob, innocent in the matter, thrust into this relationship with Jacob to be his wife. And God looks at that and says, I'm going to have mercy on her because she's been used in this whole time. And I don't pretend to know all the reasons why God does what he does, or, when you read verse 16 and then you read the first verses of 17, you're like, wow, okay. It doesn't always make sense to me, but here's what I do know. God's got a bigger thing going on than what my eyes can see. He's got something bigger going on in the world than all that I can understand. And for whatever reason, his call, he is God, he listens to Leah, and she bears Jacob a 5th son. Notice, remember now who wrote the Bible. It was men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. So whoever wrote this, we believe Moses. When Moses penned this, the Holy Spirit of God told him to write 5th son, not 7th. It's important to denote as well. So he listens to Leah. She gives Jacob a 5th son. And how does she refer to this one? Verse 18. And Leah said, God hath given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to my husband. And she called his name Issachar. His name literally means my hire. She believed God had rewarded her because she shared her maid with Jacob. That's exactly what it said. He has given me my hire because I have given my maiden to my husband. God was okay with it all. God is clearly okay with what's going on here. That's what she believes. Now, don't you think there's sometimes that God has reasons that he does things, and you and I may see that he did this for this reason, but that's not at all why God did it, right? Now, I think God does things for a myriad of reasons. And we don't know them all. We may know some, but we don't know all the reasons that God does what he does. But I think it's interesting that from a human perspective, we can see a blessing and go, oh, God must be happy with this. Or even sometimes we can turn that and we can see something negative we call in our life happen and go, well, God must be upset with me. Kind of making light of it, this illustration just came into my mind this afternoon in the hospital. Jamie said, maybe the Lord's trying to tell me this. Maybe the Lord's trying to tell me that. I said, maybe it's just kidney stuff. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he is. I'm not saying he's not. But it's interesting how we will, based on what's happening, how we'll view it. And not really understanding all the time what God may be up to. Just an observation in the life of Leah here that I think we can resonate with. So God continues to bless Leah, though 19, and Leah conceived again and bare Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, God hath endued me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she even admits it here. And she called his name Zebulun. Now, God has given me so much. 6 sons now that are from my own womb. He's given me so much. He has blessed me. And so I'm going to name him Zebulun, which means God has given. God has given. So she's back to seeing this as God's favor on her. Of course, we know that children are an heritage of the Lord. It's a miracle of God that he gives us children. It never should be taken for granted. And so we find out here in the next verse, subsequently, that Leah also has a daughter. And afterwards she bare a daughter and called her name Dinah. It's important for us to know this because in a very odd passage in the Bible, we're going to see a little bit about Dinah a little bit later. But she is the daughter of Jacob and Leah. However, just when you think that God is seeing this one way, that he's only pouring his blessings out on Leah, God also understands that there was another woman who was used as a pawn in all this, and her name is Rachel. And so what does God do? 22. And God remembered Rachel. And God listened to her. He hearkened to her and opened her womb. And this is going to be a new experience. God has now blessed her with the ability to have children. The attention goes back to Rachel. He opens her womb, 23, and she conceived and bare a son and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So she conceived a son. She recognized it as God has taken away her disgrace. She's no longer the barren one. She's no longer the one woman in the life of Jacob who cannot give him children. God has smiled on her and allowed her to have children. What a wonderful day that must have been when she realized that she was with child. And even better when she realized that she had given her husband a son. She names him Joseph. Joseph means removed my disgrace. Removed my disgrace. And then she even predicts that God's going to give her one more. And at this point in the account of the life of Jacob, Jacob begins to start getting a little homesick and even decides it's time for him to make his own homestead, to break away from Laban and have his own family that he cares for. And so we see here in verse 25, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away that I may go unto my own place and to my country. So he says, hey, it's been good here, Laban. God's blessed us, but now it's time for me to have my own family. Let me go back to my place, back to my country. Verse 26, give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done for thee. He wants to take all that belongs to him. He has earned them outright. But he has earned them, and he says, now you know how hard I've worked for you. Please let me go so I can start my own family. Verse 27, Laban responds, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, or stay, or wait a little longer. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. He says, look, man, if you don't mind, just stick around, because there's one thing I know. God has blessed me because of you. The fact that you're here and all the hard work that you've done and all these grandchildren that I have, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God has been good to me only because of you. So would you please stay? Would you please stay with me? And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. What will it cost me for you to stay? And he said unto him, thou knowest that I have served thee. Jacob says to Laban, you know I've served you, and how your cattle were with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now, when shall I provide for my own house also? So Jacob makes a good argument. He's like, look, man, there's no real price on this, okay? I'm done being hired. You know full well that God has blessed you because of me. You said so yourself. Before I got here, you had small herds. Now that I've been here, you can't even count them all. So I've done my job. Let me go. Let me start my own family. Verse 31, and he said, what shall I give you? Okay, what do you want? What do you want out of this, Jacob? Is there anything I can do for you since clearly your mind is made up? Or maybe I can do something for you and you'll stick around. And Jacob said in verse 31, thou shalt not give me anything. But if you'll do this one thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flock. He says, look, I'm not asking you to give me anything, but I'm just asking for one last favor. Let me take care of your flock for a little bit longer. 32, I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. He says, I'll tell you what, let me go through all your flocks. If I'm going to go, and I've built this, let me go through all your flocks, and I'll take all the ones you don't want. Speckled, spotted, brown, those are all the ones that are not as pure. Can't use them for offerings. Evidently, they are unusable for other things as well. They're just not the ones you want to keep around. So Jacob says, let me go through, and I'll take all the ones you wouldn't even want for myself, and you can have all the really good, healthy, pure ones. He continues, 33, so shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted for stolen with me. He's like, look, man, here's what I'll do. I'll take all the bad ones with me, and I will prove myself. And if I go away from you and you find among the ones I take, if you find one that is pure, you can say, I stole it from you and I'll serve you again. Otherwise, let me take all of the ones you don't want and I'll take them with me. So he's putting his integrity on the line, which is interesting. Keep that in mind. Verse 34, and Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to your word. He says, okay, do as you said. And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. So Jacob takes all the ones, the blemished of the flock, and gives them to his sons, and says, set these aside. Look at 36, and he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob, and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So his sons take the ones that nobody wanted, the speckled, the spotted, the impure. They took them away 3 days, and they kept them that far apart from Jacob, so there could be no mixing of the flocks. Absolutely impossible. You take them far enough away that they cannot merge. And Jacob, oh boy, 37. Now this is the guy who said, I'm going to put my integrity on the line. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and pilled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had pilled before the flocks in the gutters of the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves and put them not unto Laban's cattle. Now, I'm going to tell you what's all going on here. Let's finish these last two verses, 41 and 42. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. So, what's all this, scraped and speckled and spotted and pilled, and what's all this? Is it some mumbo jumbo? Is it magic? Is it legit? Can these animals, while looking at these rods. Can they procreate, spotted and impure children? Is that all it takes? They just look at these. Is that what it is? No, here's what it is. Jacob used a folk custom, an old wives' tale, to try to get one over on Laban. He took streaked branches, and by placing them in front of the flocks while they were mating, it was said that they would have streaked or blemished offspring. So if you wanted to get back at somebody, you would take these rods and you'd peel them open and put streaks in them, and you would set them in the spot that these animals would mate. And while they were mating in the presence of those rods there, it was said that they would have speckled offspring. So he tried a way to get one over on Laban. Jacob tries to pull one over to leave the spotted cattle of Laban and take the good ones from the flock after he had already separated. In other words, more deceit. He wasn't at all trying to play fair. He thought, I'll get him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that all of his cattle have offspring that are bad, and I'm going to take my good ones that I already set aside with me. He wasn't going to leave anything good with Laban as far as Laban knew. So we finish this chapter by reading verse 43, and it's fascinating. Talking about Jacob, and the man increased exceedingly and had much cattle and maidservants and men servants and camels and asses. This is how we read of the deceiver Jacob at the end of chapter 30. All of this weird stuff going on with him and his wives and their maids, and he's back to his old tricks of trying to pull one more over on Laban before he leaves, and trying even these old wives' fables and these tales to try to make these animals mate in front of these, just wild. And at the very end, we get the commentary in verse 43 that despite all of this, craziness going on, he increased exceedingly. Now, why is that? Because God made a promise. That's hard to believe for me and you. That God would make a promise and still keep it for a rascal like Jacob, but he did. God made a promise to Abraham. He passed that promise on to Isaac, and sure enough, he passed it on to Jacob. So God made a promise, and God had a bigger thing going on. The bigger thing that God had going on was making a people for himself, was providing a progeny, a way for the Messiah to come through this line that God himself had chosen to start with Abraham. And God just determined that's how it was going to be. And when God made that promise, there was nothing that was going to change it. Even though Jacob did everything he could to sabotage it, we would think, God still kept his promise. He still had a bigger plan going on. God was already going to bless Jacob anyway. But this is Jacob once again trying to orchestrate things his way. It shouldn't surprise us that chapter 32 is about a wrestling match. Because God's just being God. God is just doing what he said he was going to do. God is doing the things he planned from the beginning, and they're just happening. Even though you have a mess of a man like Jacob, God is still letting this go on. It should not surprise us that through the actions and the heart and the deceit of Jacob, it should not surprise us that there's going to be a wrestling match with God, where God again is going to ask him that all interesting and important question that we'll get to in chapter 32. But this is just to set us up to say, listen, when I make a promise, it doesn't matter how big of a mess people try to make, I keep my promises. And when God makes a promise to save me and you, he does so knowing that we're going to have Jacob moments in our life still. that we're going to orchestrate things, we're going to make a mess of some things. And he says, I already made a promise. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whosoever believeth on him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And the messes that you make do not change that. Not because we're good or deserving, because he's God. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for the word and these outrageous examples, honestly. And while we may never carry out the same kind of deceit and just treatment of other people that we saw in the passage tonight, we're all guilty to some level of deceit and mistreatment of others. But we also see a beautiful picture at the very end of your faithfulness and your promises. And so, Lord, tonight we just, instead of making promises that we can't keep, we just want to thank you and praise you for the promises that you keep. And Lord, may your love and may your faithfulness inspire us to yield ourselves to you. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You are dismissed.